Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this latest webinar from Business Gateway. And this morning, we're going to be looking at Unlock Your Potential and Overcoming the Fear of Success. And joining me today is Sean McGrath from Entrepreneurial Scotland. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, Hugh. Thanks a million for having me.
You're welcome. It's good to see you again. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take just a few moments to do a wee bit of housekeeping because it does take folks a wee bit of time to come through the registration process. So just a reminder for those of you who've been on our webinars before and for those of you who've not, some information on this. The session will be recorded. It's going to be made available afterwards so that lots of folk who weren't able to make it can get to hear what we're talking about. Everyone is on mute to avoid background noise. You can submit questions through the portal. Please do so. We'll be keen to see what you're thinking, and those might be inspired by some of the things that we talk about as we go through the morning. And anything that we don't cover and that we don't manage to pick up, we will do our very best to follow up with you, and we can pick those up later. So, what we're looking to cover this morning, the fear of success. The fear of success is a psychological phenomenon in business where individuals are apprehensive about achieving their business goals or attaining a high level of success. There's a feeling of guilt and hesitation when it comes to celebrating success, and there's that, well-known Scottish phrase, "a Kentie's feather." Where do you come from, kind of thing. So there's that thing about celebrating success. And it's alongside worries around increasing personal visibility and attention. Now, success also often comes with added responsibilities and expectations, especially for small businesses who fear that they won't be able to handle those increased demands on their time and abilities. Business Gateway wants to address that subject and encourage Scottish business owners to celebrate success and see the benefits it can bring. So this morning, we have teamed up with Sean from Entrepreneurial Scotland to address why we struggle to speak about success and understand the importance of creating a culture of sharing success rather than shying away from it. So, Sean, can we start? Give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and introduce Entrepreneurial Scotland and what you are doing.
Yeah, thanks a million, Hugh, and very well put in terms of the issues and the cultural challenges we face. So I think probably the first thing I need to do is address the accent and highlight that I am in fact an Irishman, and the irony is not lost on me that I'm an Irishman running an organisation called Entrepreneurial Scotland. But actually, I think that positions me perfectly to talk to Scottish people about the need to celebrate success, because I come from a country that has been on this journey. We talk about tall poppy syndrome, we talk about getting ahead of yourself. In Ireland, we have that phrase, who do you think you are? Don't get ahead of yourself. There's a great quote, and I'll digress a wee bit, but there's a great quote from Bono. He was on a big TV show in Ireland called The Late Late Show, longest running talk show in the world. And he was talking to the host, a guy called Gay Byrne. And the host asked him, "Bono, what's the big difference between living in America and between living in Ireland?" To which Bono replied, "Well, Gay, when you walk down the street in America and you see a big house and a big car and a swimming pool out front, usually the guy that sees it says, someday I'm going to be like that guy. And then in Ireland, when you're walking down the road and you see a big house and a big car, usually the guy that sees it says, someday I'm going to get that guy." And it's that attitude, it's that mentality, and that was very ingrained in Irish culture. I remember that growing up in the 80s and the 90s in Ireland. But we have managed to overcome that at home, and we've managed to push past it. Now it's still there, the imposter syndrome, and someone here once told me about the West of Scotland handbrake, the don't get ahead of yourself side of things, which probably was culturally imported by my crowd. So it still exists, but what we've recognized is the importance of getting past that. And we found a way to balance that with the importance of succeeding. And so if I can talk just a wee bit about Entrepreneurial Scotland and what we do and why we think it's so important. we're an independent charitable foundation, so we're not supported by the government. We're not funded by the government to do any of this work. We're funded by people who work with us and philanthropy and some of the ventures that we run. But our entire mission is really summed up in the fact that an entrepreneurial Scotland is a prosperous Scotland. So we exist to make this country more prosperous so that more people who need help can get it. Because we don't need millions of pounds, we need billions of pounds to solve our problem. And the only one capable of doing that is the economy, not philanthropists or individuals. So our role really is to try and encourage people to become more entrepreneurially minded. And by that, we don't necessarily mean starting businesses, we mean recognizing good ideas and executing on them. Helping businesses to grow and scale, creating jobs, creating tax revenue. I always use an analogy to try and describe the work that we do. So I always talk about the horse and the jockey. And so anybody who invests in business will always tell me the very same thing. They'll always tell me that they back the jockey just as much as they back the horse, sometimes more. And the reason they do that is because the reality is that a good business idea, it's actually 10 a penny. There's no shortage of good business ideas. What there is a shortage of is people capable of executing those business ideas and turning them into profitable ventures or growing them and scaling them. So everybody always agrees that it's the jockey they back, not the horse. And that the problem we have in Scotland is that we don't have enough jockeys to ride all the brilliant horses that we have. So we have plenty innovative. We are brilliant at ideation and innovation and creation, but it's actually the execution and commercialization that's the hard part. Now, what can we do as a small charitable foundation to support that? Well, there's a couple of things we can do. So the first thing we can do is help people to understand the root cause. And so the reality is the root cause in all of this isn't actually that we don't have enough businesses or we don't have enough startups. It comes back to the individuals. It comes back to the jockey. And a lot of what the government do, if you look at the policies that they actually write policies for horses, not for jockeys. So what we're trying to do is encourage them to understand that actually we have to build the people capable of leading these businesses. And that starts with our culture. That starts with being able to celebrate success. That starts with being able to celebrate failure. If I had £1 for every time one of the government ministers asked me, how do we create a culture that celebrates failure? I'd be a very wealthy man. And I always respond to them with, actually, we need to start by celebrating success. Because you cannot get people here to be proud of the success that you do. And if we don't have that, then we don't have role models, we don't have examples for people. It's much easier for individuals to walk a path they can see than to try and find one in the dark themselves. So we have to have people who are role models. And a lot of the work that we do really is around that. It's around encouraging people to not be so Scottish or to not be so Celtic about it and to not hide your light under a bushel. And to recognize that actually, yes, you have had the privilege of being successful, but you have the responsibility too, that if you aren't successful, then the country isn't successful. So we do it in 3 ways, and I won't labor the point too much because we've lots to talk about today, but we do it in 3 real distinctive ways. So the first thing, and I'm a terror for the analogies, so apologies in advance, but the first thing I always say is that we have to get more jockeys on the horse, right? So we need to encourage more people to think and act and lead in an entrepreneurial way. And so we have our sort of long-term solution, and we run what's called the Saltire Scholar Internship Programme. Now that programme itself has been going for 17 years. We've put nearly 2,000 high caliber students through the programme. And every single year, what we do with that programme is we work with every university in Scotland. We spend £250,000 scouring all of the students that study in Scottish universities. And we put them through a big, massive recruitment process that essentially vets for EQ, not IQ. So we're vetting for things like their curiosity, their resilience, their empathy, their humility, all these things that are important to become entrepreneurially minded leaders in the future. And then we find them, then we develop them, and then we give them, we call them internships, but they're so much more than an internship. This is not work experience, this is commercial projects. We give them real valuable commercial projects to help them drive forward and connect with their potential. So we're doing that to create the next generation of jockeys. But then we also work with those that are in the saddle right now. So we run a membership program. And essentially what it's designed to do is it's designed to build a community that supports people to be more ambitious, to give them a safe place to be successful and to be proud of being successful. Because the three biggest challenges that we hear all the time from people who are leading organizations, and it's funny because we hear this from people who are leading £1 million turnover organizations to people who are leading £300 million turnover organizations. They're exactly the same challenges, exactly the same issues. So they really come down to three things. One, leadership is lonely. You know, no matter who you are, what level you're at, an incredibly lonely place to be because there's very few people who understand what you're going through. The second challenge people have is that they found themselves in a position of leadership. They weren't necessarily prepared for it. So where do you learn to become a leader? How do you learn to become a leader? Because all that's on offer really is MBAs that teach you about finance or training courses that teach you about HR. So the only place you can learn about leadership is from other leaders. And then the third big challenge is that we all know that we're supposed to have a network. Our network is meant to be our net worth. But where do you go to build a meaningful network that allows you to be open and honest and helps you succeed? So that's what we do with our membership program. Essentially, it's small groups, 12 people in a group, and you go on a journey over the course of the year. And it's 9 different interactions that are all designed around basically building your group of 12 into a tight-knit support network for you, and then dropping in all of the senior leaders that we have in our network to help you build really meaningful connections to them. And then the third thing we do is we just bang the drum. We bang the drum for the importance of entrepreneurialism in Scotland, and we are a pain in the government's arse, and we remind them all the time of the importance of this and try and give them a bit of a rocket. So that's what we do as an organization, and that's why we believe that celebrating success is so important, and that's why we see that the most successful individuals that we deal with are capable of doing that.
Excellent. I'm intrigued by one particular aspect, and that's great, but one particular thing you've said there has got me thinking, Sean. You're saying there, your analogy, we've got lots of horses, we need more jockeys. Where is the stable that we get to see all those horses, all those opportunities? You know, you're saying we've got lots of opportunity. Where is the stable that we get to look at those, so that those of us out here who maybe aspire to run a business, own a business, lead a business, can go and look in the stable and go, I like that grey one over there, I'm going to have that. Where is that stable to look at these things?
Man, Hugh, you've fallen into my trap here now, because I can go for hours on this analogy. I'll have us mucking out stables in no time.
In a nutshell.
There isn't really. This is one of the problems that we have. Now, there are some amazing organizations out there, like Converge, which, if you haven't heard of them, are absolutely brilliant, and they do amazing stuff in universities. And they're a great example of, you know, our universities are phenomenal. We have some of the best in the world. There's, without a shadow of a doubt, the ideation and innovation that we pump out every year is second to none. The problem we have is that most of it then gets swallowed up by international companies. It gets licensed and taken away, and as a country, we don't get the benefit. The individuals get the benefit because they get a check for the work they've done, but we as a society don't get our dividend out of that. So we need to have more of that developed here, you know, or even just held on to for an extra few years to get more benefit here. There are some organizations like Converge who will help to showcase brilliant horses, amazing businesses with brilliant founders, but not necessarily entrepreneurs to drive them forward. But there isn't really a mechanism out there to connect that individual who has entrepreneurial talent with a horse. Part of what we try and do is some of that, because there's an important part of recycling entrepreneurial talent. So when somebody gets off a horse, making sure that they know where they can go to find the next horse to get back on is an important part of the network building that we do. But there isn't really an established setup that I'm aware of for that.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. I'm just conscious that there's probably a few folk have joined our webinar slightly after we started. So if you're wondering why the hell we're talking about horses and jockeys, Sean has this brilliant analogy about, you know, the business as the horse and the jockey as being the leader, the business person that's going to take it forward. And we've just been discussing there, we've got plenty of horses and perhaps not enough jockeys, so more jockeys required. Sean, yeah, just from your own personal point of view, what's been your personal journey to get to where you are now?
Oh gosh, it's been a long and a winding road, Hugh. Look, I think in some ways the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I personally connect with it. I left university in Ireland, you know, many years ago. I won't date myself by giving the year away, but I left university with a marketing degree and all the desire and ambition in the world to become an entrepreneur. I was going to take over the world. And I went to Australia and had a great old time and probably drank more than I should have and came back with a few debts. And so I walked into an agency and I said, look, I need a job. I'll do anything from cleaning toilets to running multinationals. I just need to pay back the money I owe. And I found myself inadvertently in sales, which probably doesn't come as a great surprise given my gift of the gab. So I then went on to have a pretty successful career in sales for about 7 or 8 years and was doing very, very well. I realized I got to that kind of inflection point. Someone described it the other day as the return of Saturn. I got to that inflection point near 30 where I realized, was I on the path I wanted to be on? And I wasn't. And at that point, I was going into businesses and selling them software systems and HR stuff and all that kind of crack. And the person who I was always selling to was always the accountant. So whether they were the finance director or whether they were the CEO who used to be the finance director, these flipping accountants were always running the show. So it was at that point that I was like, do you know what, if I want to do what I want to do, which was, you know, ultimately sit in a seat like this, I needed to make a change, because what I had was all of the skills in sales, and I'm a passionate advocate of the importance of commerciality in sales, but what I didn't have was the credibility, because people just saw a salesman. So I made a decision to hand back the keys to my company car and get on the bus and go back to Deloitte and retrain as an accountant at the age of 30. And you know, and I always talk about the fact that I did that intentionally for credibility, and I did that because I wanted the badge more than the education. And so I went back, trained as an accountant, spent 5 years with Deloitte, doing some great stuff there. And then I moved on to run a real estate investment trust for an organization, so looking after about $750 million of property. And then the opportunity arose to join Entrepreneurial Scotland, first as the finance director and then laterally as the CEO. And it was actually a bit of a down step to go into Entrepreneurial Scotland, but for me, I just couldn't pass it up. It's a bit like being a lifelong Man United fan and someone saying, do you fancy being the kit man? You know, you get to be in the dressing room. So absolutely, I had to take the opportunity to join. So how could I miss it? And I think the reason that it relates to me so much is because I would have loved to have been an entrepreneur, but I lost my confidence along the way. And I lost my ability to believe in myself and back myself. And I ended up going down that traditionally safe route with accountants. And so I get an enormous amount of pleasure out of seeing people succeed and seeing people step on that journey. So I think for me, that's really what got me to where I am.
Okay, thank you for that. We've had a question come in. Is there an age limit when you can finally become a jockey and ride your own horse rather than mucking out, feeding and training other people's horses and watching them win races? That's a really interesting question. I would say no, there is no age limit in my view. I guess it depends on the individual. As a person who now as Chief Officer of the Business Gateway National Unit works with local government in the delivery of the service, I've had a few cracks at trying to run my own business with varying degrees of lack of success. It hasn't gone away from me. I would still love to do something like that. So personal view, I don't think there is an age limit. And I do wonder with the kind of whole demographic thing, as possibly as a result of COVID, there's this increasing number of economically inactive people in Scotland, maybe there's an opportunity for more folk of a slightly older persuasion to get in amongst this. Certainly that's my view. Sean, any views on an age limit?
Yeah, I've got some really strong views on this, Hugh. I think there's this massive misconception that we all have to be Mark Zuckerberg. We all have to have started our business in our 20s. We did research around this, and the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of people don't start businesses until they're in their late 30s or early 40s. And so if you think about that as the starting point, then that really pushes the dial back. Quite a number of the most successful business people that I know didn't start their businesses until their late 40s, and some of them in their 50s. And if even if you take a second and if you look at some of the larger businesses that are out there, and you look at who's running them, and you look at the age profile of who's running these larger businesses, strip out Mark Zuckerberg because he's an anomaly, literally 1 in a billion, and have a look at it. They're mostly people in their 50s, and that's not because that people like grey hair. That's because it takes that long to build up the confidence and the knowledge, and it takes that long to build up the insight into what it is that you're actually going to do, because people think starting a business sometimes is just, I just have a magic idea. But you have to have experience and knowledge, So people who start businesses in specific areas, how did they understand that there was a gap in the market? Well, because they probably spent 20 years working in the market. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of dispelling the myth that people need to be in their 20s or 30s to start a business. Absolute rubbish.
Yeah, okay, no, that's really interesting. Another question there that's come in, which has just slid off my screen. One moment, please. How can we encourage more students to challenge themselves into leadership roles? I mean, you talked about your saltire work that you're doing with universities. So how do we encourage more students to challenge themselves into leadership roles?
I think it's a difficult thing, because we work with thousands of students every year. But the first thing I would say is, if you're listening to this and you believe all this snowflake rubbish, then I would ask you to dispel that, because this generation that's coming through, by the way, are ferocious. They will leave us for dead. They are incredibly driven, but what they're not driven by is money. They're driven by purpose. So the reason that a lot of people give out about this generation is because they try to motivate them in the same way that previous generations have been motivated. So annual leave and paychecks doesn't work for this generation. I mean, to these guys, that's standard. That's a hygiene factor. That's what comes with the job. You will not get the best out of these individuals unless you can connect the work that they're doing to a real purpose. Now, that purpose doesn't have to be saving the world. I mean, it's preferable if it is, but you have to connect them to the value and the importance of the work that they're doing. So I would say that in the first instance. But in terms of leadership within this generation coming through, or any generation, because we've been doing this program now for about 17 years where we work with young people, and we've seen the trajectory and the change. It's about time. It's about time and investment. So when young people come out of university, they have an enormous amount of potential, and they also have this really valuable kind of unencumbered enthusiasm. So they don't see the world that we see it, the way we see it. They have this sort of doe-eyed view of things. And one of the things that we find really advantageous when we put them into companies is that people benefit from that, because they ask the questions that people just don't ask, because they assume the answers already. And quite often asking those questions stimulates new thought. So if we want this generation to be a generation of leaders, and if we want to encourage the young people in our businesses and our lives to be leaders, then what we have to give them is responsibility. And we have to give them a safety net to make a few mistakes along the way. So what we always talk to our students about is, we say, look, failures and mistakes are absolutely par for the course. The other word for a mistake is experience, right? So most people's experience comes from the things they did wrong, not from the things they did right. So but they have to be given the space to be able to make a few of those mistakes and keep them on track, because they have all this potential, but they are quite fragile because they have nothing that they can fall back on to reinforce them. So, you know, if you and I make a mistake, which of course would never happen, but if you and I make a mistake, we have, you know, decades of experience behind us to kind of reinforce the fact that that was just a mistake and it wasn't us. So if you have young people in your organization that you want to grow and develop, absolutely invest in them. But remember that you have to give them that bit of leeway, because this is their first time going out and doing it.
Okay. Just on the subject as we're talking about that age limit thing, there's a comment from someone speaking as an oldie, well over 40, that it doesn't inhibit you from becoming an entrepreneur, but their view is there is an impenetrable barrier to accessing support or finance. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. So if you believe there's an impenetrable barrier, then there is an impenetrable barrier, because that's the approach you'll take to it. In reality, is there an impenetrable barrier? No, there isn't. And the reason I say that is because, and I'm lucky, it's easy for me to say that. I'm lucky because I have seen enough cases of people breaking through the barrier. There is a high barrier, it is difficult, but nobody ever said this was going to be easy. We do work with Sir Tom Hunter and Lord Willie Hawley. They do a podcast called the Go Radio Business Show. I would encourage you to listen if you're not already listening. It's a great podcast for Scottish business. And we line up the guests for them. And we had a guy on recently, a guy called Jawed, who was running a business called HVS, Hydrogen Vehicle Solutions. And he is quite literally trying to build the Tesla of trucks, of hydrogen trucks, and he's trying to build it in Glasgow. He had 163 documented no's before he got the investment that he needed, and it's gone on to raise over 50 million. And he is from an ethnically diverse background, from really, really challenging childhood. He is the kind of person who, by his own admission, wasn't meant to succeed, and he's fought through all of that to get there. So what I would say to people is that yes, it may seem impenetrable, and yes, it is hard. It is incredibly hard, but if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So it's meant to be difficult, and when you kind of embrace that part of the journey, it gets a lot easier. And I'm not speaking as someone who's, you know, just sitting on the sidelines and watching. All I'm doing is repeating the words I have heard successful entrepreneurs tell me.
Okay, really interesting. Important question here from someone: how do we create a better gender balance in entrepreneurialism in Scotland? And do you believe we can level it up in our lifetime? And I suppose, let you have a wee think about that for a moment, from a business gateway point of view, in terms of the startup support that we offer. 50% of our startups are female entrepreneurs, so we're doing something right in that respect. But I do recognise that beyond that, in terms of established businesses, there's only about 1 in 5 are women entrepreneurs or women leaders, women owners. And a lot of work recently through the Anna Stewart report, the Pathways report, has focused on that. So there are, you know, responses. The government is very much looking at that to see what can it look to do. And in fact, on the back of that, there was a fund launched on the 7th of September to look into that and see what support we can actually achieve. But sorry, Sean, what are your views on that one?
Yeah, it's a meaty question, and but a really important one. Will we see it in our lifetime? I haven't a clue. I don't know. I would hope that we would. You know, I'm the father of a daughter, and you know, having a daughter really drove home to me, and it's a shameful thing to admit, despite having a wife and mother and sisters and all sorts. But it wasn't until I had a child that I realized just how stacked the world is against female entrepreneurs and you know, and to be honest, women in general. But what we have in Anna Stewart is a powerful champion, and the very person we need to try and drive this agenda forward. And what I love about what Anna Stewart does is she is trying to build consensus towards solving this problem. as opposed to an adversarial approach. And so she talks about turning men into allies. And I just think she's absolutely bang on the money, because there are so many people that I know that want to solve the problem, but the truth of the matter is we don't know how. And they're slightly afraid to get involved because they don't want to be accused of getting it wrong. And what Anna does is provides a safe space for people to come in and learn about how we can solve this, because it is a problem. It's absolutely a problem. And it's not just, there are some people who will think that all of this is a bit of do-gooder, gender balance, you know, all this kind of stuff, that what's that got to do with the economy and driving it forward? Aside from being a morally important issue to rectify, even as an accountant, I can tell you, as a cold, hard cash aspect, we have to solve it, because we have a demographic time bomb in this country. We do not have enough younger people in our population. So we have to, even if you were some kind of caveman living under a stone and disagreed with all of these policies, you have to understand that we have an economic imperative to empower as many people in our community, no matter where they are, to become entrepreneurial. And it is stacked against women. It is very, very difficult for women to step up, and there's challenges that they need to overcome that men just don't face. And I think it starts with getting people to understand that, and then giving them the breathing space to be able to digest that and become part of the solution, because they do want it. Nobody disagrees. Everybody wants to solve the problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just reflecting on the question though, and you know, it goes back to that age thing, you know, in our lifetime. Well, that kind of depends on where you are. Maybe not for me, but
yeah, it's been a bit of a short runway for us.
So no, that's been really interesting. And thanks everyone out there for those questions that were coming in. So keep coming in. We will try and, as I say, get to as many of those as we can. So Sean, you talked there about your career journey. It's been varied. Do you think that's given you a good grasp for the working world generally, and especially when you're looking to support others?
100%. So I talked briefly here about the fact that, you know, I started off with a degree in marketing and fell into sales, and then became an accountant to kind of get the credibility to move on. And I always talk about, you know, I'm very lucky to sit in a position of leadership within an organization like ES. And I always talk to other accountants. I go back and do chats for ICAS, and I talk to other accountants about the fact that it's not actually it wasn't the financial education that helped me to get this role, and it wasn't the financial education that gives me the advantage in this role. It was the sales experience. So I think whenever I talk to everybody or anybody involved in organizations and business, and particularly young people, it's helping them to understand that it's EQ that makes the difference. Once you get past physically doing the job yourself, you know, in terms of churning out, you know, pots in a pottery stand or spreadsheets in an accounting setting or whatever the case may be, it is your EQ that makes all the difference. And what I learned when I was in the world of commercial sales is I learned how to harness that, and I learned how to actively listen to people. I learned how to connect with people. I learned how to understand their point of view as opposed to drive home mine. And I learned to address their needs rather than try and sell my solutions. And those are the types of things that in a business setting, like, it never fails to amaze me. We're incredibly lucky to have some very, very senior members of our community who have run multi-billion-dollar businesses. So, you know, as an example, there's Mark Hunter, who's from the Bridge of Weir, who ran Molson Coors, one of the biggest brewers in the world, out of Denver, Colorado, for a number of years. You have Kim Perdicue, who is Glasgow born and bred, who ran Juniper Networks, a multi-billion-dollar business in Silicon Valley. And when you talk to these people, it's incredible to hear them talk about the fact that it comes back to the basics. Comes back to EQ, it comes back to people, it comes back to clear communication. It's simple stuff. So I think having learned that through my journey, and then having it reinforced by because there was a natural assumption in me that, oh, look, that's fine at my level doing my stuff. But when you're running businesses of scale, that doesn't matter. It's all about strategy and finance. It's not at all about strategy and finance. That stuff just takes care of itself at that level. It's all about people and EQ. So I would just encourage anyone who is running an organization, whether you're one person or whether you're 100 or 100,000, have a think about yourself, have a think about your leadership journey, have a think about your EQ, have a think about how you are filling your pot, because it's your cup that everyone else drinks from. So how are you keeping yourself on an even keel, and how are you being the leader that you want to be? And that's the experience that I've learned, and that's why I'm so passionate about bringing people together, bringing business leaders together to help them support each other, because there really is nothing like it.
Okay, no, really good. Thank you for that. You spoke earlier, and when you were talking about Entrepreneurial Scotland, what you do, about as a nation, we kind of struggle to celebrate success. There's this, I spoke earlier about the psychological phenomenon in business around the fear of success. Can you tell us a bit more about that and the impact that it can have?
It's huge, Hugh. It's a systemic problem in Scotland, and again, we've done the research to back this up. So we did a survey of successfully scaled leaders and those that were on the scaling journey and those that didn't scale. And we asked a few questions, but the one question that was most telling, we asked people what was harder, starting the business or scaling the business. And to a man, woman, and dog, every one of them came back and said it was much harder scaling the business. And the reason that it was much harder scaling the business was because when they started, all they were risking was themselves and their own capital, right? And they didn't mind that. They were prepared to take a risk on their own. But when they were scaling the business, they suddenly had 5 or 10 or 20 employees. And now they were risking people's mortgages. Now they were risking people's livelihoods. Now they were risking something that they had already built. And then they were also risking their own sense of who they were. So the amount of people I spoke to who were afraid of losing themselves, they were, and I hope you don't mind me being so blunt, but as one fella said, disappearing up his own arse, and that's what success looked like to him, was that he'd be gone and he wouldn't be able to go down to the pub because he'd just be this arse that no one wanted to have a pint with. And that fear is real, and that feeds into people's decisions whether they will or won't grow a business, which ultimately costs jobs and ultimately costs tax, and means we have less to pay for the NHS because people are afraid of being successful and what being successful might mean in their community.
Really good. What are your top tips then for changing that mindset on success?
So my top fact, really, and again, this comes from the research that we've done, right? And apologies if I've been blunt with the language here, but if you were an arsehole, you'd be an arsehole, right? So success doesn't change you, just uncovers you. So if you are down the pub and people want to have a pint with you now, they'll want to have a pint with you whether you're successful or not, because you are who you are, and success doesn't really change people, it uncovers them, and we've seen that time and time again. My top tips as well would be to embrace the fact that success is important. Actually, you have a societal responsibility to be successful. There are broadly 3 types of people. There are those that can create opportunities for themselves, those that can't create opportunities for themselves, and those that can create opportunities for others. And so if you're a person who can create opportunity for others, you have a responsibility to help that guy in the middle, the guy who can't create opportunities for themselves. So embrace the fact that your success is vital to Scotland's success. And seek out other people like yourself, because there are other people like you who are hungry to win and who aren't necessarily driven by money, but who are driven by succeeding and driving something forward. So if you could find people like that, that'd be a great comfort to you.
Great. Thank you for that. Fear, and that point about fear perhaps being more visible if you start shouting about the success you've had. Is there a way to share your success in business without necessarily being the face of it?
100%. Yeah, there's lots of ways. I mean, we all, I hope, understand that success isn't a solo pursuit. It's team driven. I have never met anyone who's been successful who has ever said that they did it all by themselves. It's always built with other people. So the best way to celebrate success is to celebrate it through your team, and to celebrate it as the success of the team, because, you know, to be honest, it is the success of the team. So we always encourage people to do that. And you can be a role model. So you can tell the story of your success in the right way. So if you stand up and you start pulling out the Rolex and the Ferrari and you say, look at all this amazing stuff, that's not the right way to talk about your success. But people in Scotland inherently understand that. But what you can do is you can talk about the success in terms of the joy that you have received from this. So not the joy of driving the Ferrari around the track, but the joy of seeing, you know, jobs created, the joy of seeing an idea come to life, the joy of just solving a problem that you knew could be solved, and the joy of having that freedom to do something that you love doing. So we get people to talk about that all the time because that really resonates with individuals. But again, then finding these rooms, because we always say big things start in small rooms. And as an organization, we have a huge vision where ultimately we want to change the culture of an entire nation, which is, you know, a massive idea of, you know, building the most entrepreneurial society in the world, but changing that culture and mindset so that you can walk down the street and be proud of your success. But we're not there yet. So the best way to do it is to find rooms, find small rooms, you know, like your chambers of commerce, or, you know, Join Us, or there's another organization we do that's a membership organization, or Vistage or YPO, or all these organizations where you can meet like-minded people and celebrate in that safe place first. Because if you don't celebrate your success, if you don't believe in yourself, if you don't take pride in the work that you're doing, you're going to run out of fuel. It's going to be very, very hard to fight through the harder parts. So, yeah.
Okay. We just had a question relating to that. What about if you're a sole trader? It's only you. So if you talk about your success, it sounds like you're bragging about yourself. And clearly, as a sole trader, you would be. But I guess my thought on that is, what's wrong with that? You know, talk about your success. You've achieved it. It's you that's doing that. Get in there. That's the whole point of what we're talking about here. Don't be afraid of the success. Don't be afraid to tell people about it, because I guess business clearly must be about promoting your business and what it's achieved and what you have done, because that wins you business, wins you customers. And if you're interested in growing your business, okay, you're a sole trader just now, but you know, you could, let's think about this, 170 odd thousand people in Scotland are sole traders running sole trader businesses. Goodness, if we could get every one of them to create one job, what a fantastic opportunity that would be. Sean, your thoughts on that?
You've hit the nail on the head, Hugh, and you know, if you're listening to this and you are a sole trader, you are in the loneliest place in the world. And my heart goes out to you, because you have a tougher job than someone who's running a business with 50 or 100 staff, because absolutely everything falls on you. And it's a difficult place to grow from. And I know lots of sole traders who decide not to grow because they just don't want any extra bother. I would encourage you to be proud. You know, there's a big difference between bragging and shouting about success and just being proud. You know, there's nothing wrong at all. If it was your son or your daughter that had set that business up, you'd be proud as anything. You'd be telling people about their great success and how proud you are of them. So why can't you be proud in yourself? And if, you know, I agree with you, Hugh, you have to, the smaller the business, the more the success of the organization is linked to you as the individual. And so as a sole trader, you cannot promote the business without promoting yourself, because you are the business. So if if you're a tradesman or something like that, then it's the quality of your work. You have to be proud of your work because it's your work that people are buying. So I would say, look, be proud, right? Push against any of that nonsense that we tend to feed ourselves, and find places. There are so many amazing organizations out there where you can go to be surrounded by other sole traders and other people on that journey. And if you chat to them, they'll give you the confidence and they'll give you the validation to be proud of what you do.
Absolutely. Really interesting question here. Is fear of failure more limiting than fear of success?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I'd say they're the bread on either side of the sandwich, really, because it's one is as bad as the other. What does it boil down to, right? It boils down to risk, right? So if you're afraid of succeeding or if you're afraid of failing, it means you're afraid of risk. And what people don't understand is that risk is one side of the coin and the other side of that coin is opportunity. So if you eliminate risk from your life, you eliminate opportunity. It's as simple as that, because you cannot have one without the other. So what we try and encourage people to understand is that entrepreneurially minded individuals are not risk takers, they're risk assessors. There's this fraudulent view that people who are successful are gamblers and take risks and do crazy things. Not at all. Most of the entrepreneurs that we know are incredibly calculated individuals. There are definitely those who, when they're young, get in and take a risk without actually understanding that they've taken a risk. That's not the same as someone being a risk taker. So I think if you're afraid of failure, then what you're afraid of doing is stepping out of your comfort zone. And if you're afraid of success, you're afraid of stepping out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. We've had a question from someone. In the past, they have experienced stress followed by burnout and then sickness. Any formula when to stop and how many breaks to take? They are a sole trader and they realised that they were afraid of stress. And I guess I would say, I don't think there's a formula because everybody's unique, everybody's different. What works for one person may not work for another. But what I would say is, and certainly this is something we did as a service during the whole COVID situation, is we promoted resources on mental health and well-being. Seek out those resources and make use of them, because absolutely it is an issue. We recognise it's not just an issue because of COVID, although that was very specific and very, very strong. It's there all the time. Get that. Seek out those resources on well-being and mental health and make use of them. And all the best with that one. Okay. Yeah. So where we got to? What would you say, Sean, are the broader impacts if we as a nation and as businesses don't shout about our successes?
Then we're stuck in the rut we're in. And apologies now in advance, because I get quite animated about this. Till the day I die, I will absolutely shout from the rooftops of the importance of this, not because I'm some kind of fervent believer in it, or because I think I've cracked some code, just because I've seen it done. I have seen it done in Ireland. I lived through the period where we achieved this as a country. It is not rocket science. It's not hard. It just requires us to actually collaborate and come together. And I get so frustrated and almost upset, to be honest, because and no disrespect to my own kinsmen back home, but we're better talkers than we are doers, right? And whereas the Scots are much better doers than they are talkers. And so it frustrates the life out of me, because every day I would back a Scotsman over an Irishman in terms of getting it done and delivering it. So, but we just don't stand up, and we don't believe in ourselves, and we don't create a culture where we, I always say, if we could just be 10% more American, not 20%, because then we'll lose the run of ourselves, but 10%, just a little 10% of America into the Scottish psyche, and we could take over the world. We could absolutely take over the world. Like the comparison I always come back to, and again, so apologies if I'm being a broken record with the whole Irish thing, but Ireland this year, right? We face in Ireland a surplus, budgetary surplus of somewhere, I think I'll get the numbers wrong, but it's somewhere between kind of 10 and 14 billion, right? So there's more cash in the economy than Ireland is spending right now. Scotland, a country of the same size, arguably with much better resources, much better educated individuals, better access to the English market, which by the way is an exporting market of 60 million people, right? And we're facing a deficit of something like 19 billion. So you have one country over the other side, which is lolling cash, and this country here that cannot afford to pay for the things that we're doing right now. And I think we can all agree that the system we have right now is not an amazing system. So not only can we afford not to pay for it, but we can't afford to improve it. And that comes down to the strength of our economy, and that comes down to our ability to recognize our place in the world and use the resources that we have. So if Scotland was able to harness the soft power that we have, because we're a small country, so we don't have hard power, we only have soft power. If we could harness that, and if we could effectively build more scalable companies, then the sky's the limit as to what we could achieve. But it all starts with the jockeys. It all starts with the individuals, and it starts with them believing that they're capable of doing it.
Yeah, I'm interested there just to explore a wee bit more. And in essence, we're talking about a culture of that, culture of success, culture of fear of failure, and so on. And it's like when you're saying about slightly more American, and there is the old saying about in the UK, not just Scotland, in the UK, if you go bankrupt, you're frowned upon. You have failed, you are bankrupt. In America, the anecdote is that after you've been bankrupt 5 times, people say to you, you're beginning to understand how business works. And it's just a different attitude, it's a different culture to failure at the end of the day. So, yeah.
To everything, yeah. And look, I'm always fairly open about it. Like, I suffer enormously from imposter syndrome, because who am I to be sitting here pontificating about this stuff? And I run a charitable foundation with 17 staff, and every day is a fight to keep the coffers going and to keep the organization going, because that's the nature of a charity. So I get that it's hard, it's incredibly hard. But if you can connect to the wider purpose of it isn't about us, and it's about society, it's about the opportunities for others, that it makes an enormous difference to the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's turn it on its head a wee bit. What if, in fact, you are someone that does celebrate success? What tips would you have, Sean, on where they can go to maintain that positive mindset? How do they keep that vibe and that buzz going?
Oh, but easy. Come to me. Come to Entrepreneurial Scotland. That's we're on the hunt. We always say we look for people who are on their toes, not on their knees, when we talk about resilience, right? So we look for people who are primed to take off, as opposed to people who are suffering, because the idea isn't to build resilience to just keep you alive. The idea is to build resilience to help you take off so that you can grow the economy. So, if you are someone who is proud of what you do, if you're someone who believes that you're capable of achieving, then you're ready to talk to someone like ourselves. You're ready to join an organization that's designed to fuel that. If you haven't reached that stage yet, then still come and talk to us, but we need people to have a growth mindset. You need to be ambitious. You need to be hungry and passionate about driving forward. And then what you'll find is a whole world of senior leaders, people who have been on that journey before you, who are ready to help you. And they're ready to help you just because they love seeing it done. They love to see people succeed, and they love to give back, and because people help them on the road. So seek out places like, and there are other organizations other than Entrepreneurial Scotland, but seek out organizations like ourselves that can help to harness that, because what you're really doing is you're building resilience for when the roller coaster goes back down again.
Okay, so there you go. That kind of covers that particular piece of it. And I want to go back. There was a question that came up earlier, which I didn't quite get to. I want to go back to it because you've talked about Entrepreneurial Scotland, what you do, your programs such as the Saltire work with university students. But with a question earlier on, which I apologize I didn't get to, what about those of us without the advantage of a university education in terms of that kind of, being business person, that confidence, the success, the fear of failure and so on? What's your thoughts on folks who perhaps, is a university education an advantage? Start with that as a potential aspect of this.
So if someone can have a quick flick through the audience, and if there's anyone from a university on, if you can just kind of cut them off for a few minutes, because I won't be flavour of the month for what I'm about to say next. A university degree doesn't matter at all to success, and again, that's not an opinion, that's just the fact coming through. I mean, is it a helpful thing to have for the majority of people? Absolutely, of course. Education's a great lifter of people and social mobility, but does your education correlate to your ability to be a successful entrepreneurially minded leader? Not at all. In fact, there's information to indicate that the more IQ you have, the less likely you are to be a successful leader. So it doesn't at all. The only reason that we focus on universities as our kind of starting point for the jockeys is because we're trying to eat a pie that's so large that we have to start somewhere. And so at the end of the day, we will assess probably 600 or 700 incredibly talented individuals, every one of them capable of doing amazing things. But we can only secure anywhere between 150 to 200 opportunities every year for them. So if we widen the net out to colleges and schools and various other locations, we're just disappointing more people. So we, at the moment, focus only on universities because they are the easiest section of that pie to carve out and work with. And they have the resource to work with us. But absolutely, as our ambition, so we put about 150 to 200 students a year out, but we have a growth plan over the next 5 years to get to 450 students a year, at which point I'm really excited about broadening out into the colleges in particular, because I was down in Dumfries and Galloway yesterday, and some of the individuals coming out of our colleges are absolutely just as gifted, and what they need is that spark and that inspiration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously, quite recently, we've seen the announcement from the government of additional support and this idea of entrepreneurial campuses, which are going to be kind of engaging through the colleges for the delivery of additional support to students. Because something I guess we have to remember here that, university education, but there's also colleges doing fantastic work out there in supporting folk. So, I would be personally interested to see how the entrepreneurial campuses pan out on that. Can you please say a little bit more about the higher IQ, less leadership skills correlation?
Yeah.
And can you do it in about a minute and a half? Because we're getting close to the end.
Yes, it's dead simple. Look, if you think about your head as a unit of 100, and there's two things in there. There's IQ and there's EQ. Now, some people are blessed and they have 200 units in their head and they've got 100 of IQ and 100 of EQ. But most of us, it's a kind of an either or an or, and there's a very, very clear correlation to people being incredibly intelligent and over analyzing. So what they do is they're almost too intelligent to a degree. They recognize all the risks and all the options, and so they discount luck, which is an enormous part of most people's journey. And they never get off step one because they can see all the things that can go wrong. And then there's also sometimes when people are a little bit too intelligent, and that's a terrible thing to say. Nobody's too intelligent, but when you have a high IQ, there is a real draw into the detail and the passion for detail. And we see it particularly with the likes of engineers, where they seek so much satisfaction in solving the problem that they're not particularly driven by the growth in the commercial aspect or dealing with people. So again, this is where EQ, entrepreneurs are people who get things done. And in order to get things done, you have to be able to deal with people. You either have to sell to people, or you have to bring people on board to work or to invest. You cannot get away from that. And that's why EQ is so important.
Okay, brilliant. Listen, Sean, I am so sorry that we have to draw this to a close, because that has been fantastic. I have really enjoyed speaking to you again. I look forward to the opportunity of speaking to you again. So folks, thank you all for joining us today. Be proud, talk about your success, don't be afraid of failure, get out there and network. All the best, take care.